Welcome to the Stronger by Science podcast. I'm Greg.
And I'm Lyndsey.
And we have a great show for you today. This is our first episode of the new season and also our first real, non-fireside chat episode of the new podcast lineup with me and Linz on the mics. And season's back, baby. We're excited for the return of the pod. From now until, I don't want to say exactly when, but at least a few months from now. Expect new episodes in your feeds every 2 weeks. It will be alternating with the newsletter we also send out every 2 weeks. So it'll be podcast week, newsletter week, podcast week, newsletter week. You get the point. Linz, do you want to talk about the newsletter real quick?
Yeah, I'll just talk about it real quick just so people know what it is. I think it's a good complement to the show. It's something that Greg and I collaborate on, where he writes a review of a recent paper and we publish that as an article on the website, and then I kind of edit that down into a really digestible version for Instagram and for the newsletter. And so if you want to get just really concise reviews of recent research, we send those out every other Wednesday, along with other articles and things like that we publish on the website. So we really try to keep the quality of the things that we're sending you in your inbox high, because we know that a lot of people will just spam you. But I think it's worth signing up for. And you can do that at strongerbyscience.com/newsletter, or there's a form right at the top of the homepage. So just strongerbyscience.com.
Absolutely. So just to get this out of the way early, for longtime fans of the podcast, you might notice that previously it was Eric and I on the podcast. Now it is me and Lyndsey. So there's a bit of a change there. Eric has moved on. So happy trails to him. He is no longer working with Stronger by Science. He's taken a job. He's taken a research position working at Duke in Herman Ponser's lab. So gonna be doing a lot more primary research on things like the constrained energy model, energy expenditure variability. A lot of exciting stuff. A lot of lines of research that have interested him for years. So we're very excited for him, and we wish him nothing but the best in his future endeavors. But here and now, at Stronger by Science, the show must go on. The podcast must continue. People demand their audio content, so we are carrying on, Linz and I, and I'm excited. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. But this is a new podcast lineup, obviously, so the dynamics are probably going to be a little bit different. The banter is probably going to be a little bit different. The exact kind of segments and formula of the podcast will probably change and be somewhat up in the air for a while we settle in on a format and dynamic that feels good to record and that the audience enjoys as well. So there's probably going to be a bit of experimentation over the next couple of months. And so if you could, we would very much appreciate it if you could just give us a little bit of grace while we settle into a new podcast format. But we're very excited and optimistic about where this thing is going to go. One more thing to note is a popular segment of the old podcast was a just kind of rapid fire Q&A segment where we tried to get through as many questions as we could relatively quickly. One of the things we want to try with this new season coming back is a slightly different approach to Q&As. So one of the things that always felt a little bit weird about the Q&A segments before was just us picking a question and reading it and then immediately launching into answering it in our own voice. Sometimes, I shouldn't admit this, but sometimes it's hard to read on mic, and then people are like, does this guy not know how to read? Is he illiterate? And honestly, maybe a little bit, but it's a lot of pressure, and people might phrase things weird or use weird punctuation, whatever. I didn't feel like that flowed as well as it possibly could have.
It's also best for people to pronounce their own names. That seems like a difficult thing as well.
Yes, yes, that is also true. And as someone who has a name that is frequently mispronounced or misspelled, that's something I'm sensitive to. So yeah, we're going to try something new with the Q&As. We've set up a new email inbox that is podcast@strongerbyscience.com. And if you have a question that you'd like to have answered on the show, record a voice message and send it to that email address. That is, again, podcast@strongerbyscience.com. Try to keep it under 30 seconds, but just being straight up with you, if it's over 60 seconds, we're not going to listen to it. We just don't have time to do that. And just for the benefit of the show, that would just kind of drag, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a third host almost.
Right.
Somebody just writes in 10-minute voice memo.
Yes. So if you have a question, we would love to answer it on the show. Send us a voice message to just record a voice memo on your phone. Send it to that address. That is how we are going to do Q&As. But again, keep it snappy. Try to keep it under 30 seconds. Definitely keep it under 60. Beyond that, standard things to get through at the top of each episode. If you're looking for an excellent nutrition app that will coach you along as you try to gain weight, lose weight, maintain weight, take a lot of the cost of decision making off of your plate, you should check out our nutrition app, Macro Factor. If you're looking for a excellent coach to help you pursue any fitness or body comp related goals you could possibly have, check out Stronger by Science Coaching. We have a team of excellent coaches there who would love to help you out. If you're looking for a research review to keep up to date with all of the cool research coming out related to strength sports, physique sports, getting jacked, getting ripped, etc., check out MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. I guess it doesn't have a formal link to this podcast anymore. I left it a couple months back. Eric is no longer here. But guess what? It still fucking rocks. It's a great product. You should check it out. It's still just absolutely cooking. And the person who replaced me at MASS, Lauren Colenso Simple, her contributions to her first few episodes have been very strong. Replacing me with Lauren, I think, has been a clear upgrade for MASS. So if you haven't checked it out, or if you subscribed before and you're curious about what's going on there these days, check it out again. It's awesome. And finally, if you'd like good supplements on the cheap, check out bulksupplements.com. Use code SBSPod at checkout, and that will get you a discount on your order. And finally, if you'd like to keep up to date with what we're doing, and in particular, if you'd like to connect with like-minded people to discuss the show or just anything else health and fitness related that's on your mind, check out the Stronger by Science Facebook group and or subreddit. Good folks there, and that's probably the best place to just get in touch with us generally. So yeah, let's hop right into it.
Let's do it.
So if you listen to the last Fireside Chat episode, you probably got a bit of an introduction to Lyndsey already, but I shouldn't admit this since I was previously the host of the Fireside Chats, but not the main episodes. A lot of people skip the Fireside Chats. We realize that. So this will be a lot of y'all's first introduction to Lyndsey. So Lyndsey is my wife. And she is also probably the person whose content you've actually consumed the most of at Stronger by Science, even if you didn't realize it. If you follow us on social media, if you get our newsletter, any of that, that's all Lyndsey. She's
crafting your words or Eric's words previously into something. They're not my words. I'm just editing and kind of finessing them for the platforms they're being shared on. Just to be fair, to everyone creating content.
Well, in the end, they are your ultimate words.
Okay.
Anyway, she's the person who has been running the show behind the scenes this whole time. She is the reason that Stronger by Science is actually a business, and that I'm not living under a bridge somewhere. And she's generally excellent and great, and I think you're going to like her a lot. And germane to this podcast, her formal background is in journalism. She has a journalism degree. And after getting out of school, working in journalism for a while, she was ahead of the curve in realizing that it is, in fact, and has always been, the lying fake news media. So
I don't know about that.
She left it behind for the much more noble world of
blogging,
of fitness blogging. But yeah, so we're gonna, like I said at the top of the show, we're going to experiment with the format and segments a little bit, but we kind of think Lyndsey's beat is probably going to be kind of like light media criticism, almost like keeping up with what is going on in the media and health and science journalism, more mainstream stuff than we typically cover on the show, and things that may not be on your radar but maybe should be, because you're likely to encounter them on social media, or you might hear about them from a friend or family member, and they'll say like, hey, what's going on with this? And if you're just like all aboard kind of the evidence-based fitness content universe, it may be something that you're kind of like peripherally aware of but haven't really dug into, that for generally understanding what's going on in the industry and what's going on in just different niches of the fitness industry, you probably should know about, or at minimum stuff you'll probably find interesting, just knowing what's going on in the broader industry. So that is probably what your beat is going to be.
I think so. Yeah. And I think like what'll be cool about it is I'll keep my eye on, the news articles and what's being shared on social and stuff. And I can come into these episodes and give a broad overview of these different topics. And then we can tap into your knowledge of the research, which is something that I don't have experience in. It's like reading research. So we can kind of bring those two things together to present like a really cool, well-rounded overview of different fads or like weird things being shared around, or just like fun things that we think the audience is going to find amusing.
Exactly. So you have a segment prepared.
I do. Yeah. So this is the first one of those.
Take it away.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So what we're going to be talking about is vibration plates. Greg, do you know anything about vibration plates?
I know a little bit about vibration plates. I have some firsthand experience with them. There is one at the Lifetime Fitness we go to, and I like it. I think it's fun.
What do you like to use it for?
For just like generally stretching, I guess.
Yeah.
Like a stretch where it might otherwise feel like it takes 20-30 seconds for things to start kind of relaxing and loosening up. On a vibration plate, it might take like perceptually it feels like it takes maybe a little less time, like 10-15 seconds or something like that. And really more than anything, I just think it's fun.
Yeah.
I'm a novelty seeking creature, and it's like a weird little sensory experience. So that's mostly why I use it. But yeah, I do know a reasonable bit about it, but I don't know all of the content you plan to cover, so I don't necessarily want to scoop you. But I do know that they're often used and recommended, at least in the clinical world, for people who might have like low strength or low like bone mass, bone mineral density, and also might struggle to do more conventional exercise. So it's a sort of low intensity thing people can do that doesn't require them to generate the movement that still has at least like some of the benefits of some types of exercise. So I know that that's generally what they were developed for and kind of the more clinical uses of them. But I'm less aware of what people try to use them for if they're not in kind of a clinical population.
Right. And there are a lot of people trying to use them for things that are not in a clinical population. And that's how I became aware of it is, I guess it's a skyrocketing thing on TikTok right now. Now, I am deeply uncool, so I don't learn about TikTok trends from TikTok itself, but from newsletters that are talking about popular things on TikTok. So that's a little embarrassing, but that's how I learned about it is an article from Beth Skorecki at Lifehacker. And yeah, so the vibrating plates vary in size and price. There are the ones on Amazon, and these are the ones that like a lot of the girls on TikTok are using, and they're like, cheap, $100 or so. And they look like kind of like scales, and you either stand on them or I saw videos of people lying on them, people like kneeling on them, lots of just getting crazy with it. And they go up to like $7,000. So like the one that's at our gym is kind of the top of the line model. And that one is like thousands and thousands of dollars. And those are the ones that are probably being used in the research.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people using them in non-clinical purposes. But there are also a lot of different types. There's whole body vibration, low intensity vibration, and localized vibration. I think the big one that's at our gym is a whole body vibration one. And then just like the smaller ones that can't shake you as hard are the low intensity ones.
Yeah.
But so the people on TikTok and why these are getting really popular right now are saying that vibration plates can be used as a means of exercise and to aid weight loss.
Hell yeah.
So there's actually a gym I found whenever I was researching this in Colorado that is, the entire gym is just full of vibration plates, and all of the exercises are just people doing various exercising while standing on $7,000 pieces of equipment.
Dude, I want to know where they got the money for that, because
it's so expensive.
It's expensive to outfit a gym in the first place,
Yeah.
but at least like most other pieces of gym equipment have a reasonably large footprint, so they take up space, so there's like a finite amount of just money you can put on the floor of a gym. But like, dude, these aren't that big. Like it had to have been so expensive to outfit that gym, like
Right.
per square foot.
And it's just rows of them.
Yeah.
Like 30 of these $7,000 things, and then only one person can use it at a time per class. So I have no idea how that's gonna work, but they're trying it.
That seems like a weird piece of gym equipment to go up to someone and be like, hey, how many more sets do you have? Like, can I work in? Because like
That's not gonna work. Yeah.
Yeah, because most of the time people are going to be focused on the exercise at hand. But if you're just doing just like body weight squats or whatever, like you're going to be able to make full eye contact. You're going to be able to have a conversation. And it's also going to, you don't have a good excuse to get out of it, I guess, because it's like, it's going to be annoying to change the weights out. Like I'm just getting like apprehension of like theoretical social anxiety that I would experience like going to that gym.
Yeah. And just like talking to somebody while they're vibrating, that feels weird too.
Yeah. I mean, like when I use it, when you say something to me and I respond, I don't think my voice sounds like super fucked up, but I just expect that I'm going to sound like, I don't know if kids still do this. I assume they do. This seems like a fun kid thing for all generations, but just like
yelling into a fan.
Yeah. Talking through a fan.
Yeah.
That's how I expect my voice to come out when I'm on a vibrating platform.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a whole gym of them. People are really into this right now. And trying to use it to lose fat. That's kind of the main thing that's being pitched. And it seems like they're kind of doing it in a spot reduction way as well. Like I saw a video of a girl, like she was lying her stomach on it and said it was like for spot reduction of belly fat, and then like lying her butt on it and saying it was going to help her grow like better glutes.
So it sounds like they're promoting it as like an everything wonder machine.
Yeah.
If you want to make something smaller, guess what? This will make it smaller. And if you want to make something bigger, it'll make it bigger too.
Yeah.
How does it know if it needs to do biggering things or smallering things? Who fucking knows?
Who knows? Yeah,
There
was an article that I read that kind of listed out a lot of the claims, and it really is just literally everything. It'll aid weight loss, burn fat, improve flexibility, enhance blood flow, reduce muscle soreness after exercise, build strength, and decrease stress hormone cortisol. So
you love it.
That's a lot.
Man, if all of those claims are true, I'm shocked that not everyone already owns one and that they haven't just taken everything over, which makes me wonder if maybe not all of those things are true.
Yeah. So, Greg, have you seen any of these videos or heard people talking about this or seen people using these in the past?
I haven't really. These devices themselves have popped up like in my social media feeds, but exclusively as ads. Like the manufacturers making them are just like putting them in my feed and saying like, hey, you should buy this product that we're selling. I don't know if I've ever come across any like organic content from someone who is just like a happy user and is saying like, hey, I do this, you should do it too. Which also, who knows how much of that is paid promotion? But
that's true. Yeah.
I've never, I'm aware of these devices, but I've never seen them in the wild in any way that even like smells organic. Like it has, for me at least, always just been like a straightforward ad.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably in circles that you just don't really get content for.
I am sure that's true.
But what would you do if you saw this Amazon description for one of them that said it helps your body process fat 30 times faster than running? I feel like this is why you're not saying stuff like this. They know that you're you're just gonna get angry. How do you measure that?
It goes back to something more basic than measurement. Like, how are you operationally defining processed fat? Like,
great question.
Is it digestion and absorption? Is it lipolysis? Is it like actual like beta oxidation? Like what there are so many things your body does to process fat.
Right.
What are they talking about? Yeah.
We should ask it as a question on the Amazon page. See what the manufacturer has to say. One of the other things that a lot of the listings on the sales pages for these things claim that it works as a lymphatic draining machine, which I've been seeing this phrase everywhere recently, and I do not know what it means.
Yeah, okay. So your body has two circulatory systems, basically. And one of them, everyone knows about, and it's your blood. You got your veins, arteries, capillaries, whatever. You also have a parallel circulatory system, your lymphatic system, which it does a lot of stuff. The probably two most noteworthy things is so like when you eat fat, it's like fat itself isn't water soluble. Your blood is mostly water. So for fat and things like cholesterol to get transported around your blood, it needs to be packaged up into these little things that are water soluble, or at least like aren't going to separate out. So like chylomicrons, and like HDL, LDL, like those lipoproteins are basically like little storage vessels to transport stuff around in your blood that otherwise wouldn't be able to mix well with they wouldn't go well in an aqueous solution. Mm-hmm. So when you eat fat, your body, instead of absorbing it and sending it into your bloodstream like it would with amino acids or carbohydrate, it sends it to your liver via your lymphatic system, where it's then packaged up and can be released into the bloodstream. Huh. So that's one thing your lymphatic system does. But it's also where like a lot of like immune cells like that's, I mean, you have immune cells in your blood too, obviously, but like your lymph nodes, like they create lymphatic fluid that has a lot of immune cells in it. And that's kind of like a primary place where those immune cells are created and then kind of passed around the body so that they can get to where they need to go. And so the idea of lymphatic drainage is people have this idea that like if your lymphatic system gets, I guess, like quote unquote backed up.
Oh gosh.
That it can make you like look puffy. Like when people talk about lymphatic drainage, I think they're mostly thinking about it in terms of like their like cheeks or like neck appearing like puffy and swollen, because like you have some lymphatic tissue there. And so when people do like a lymphatic drainage massage, it's basically just kind of like a face and neck massage to feel like you're like pushing that lymphatic fluid down like out of your face so that you'll appear less puffy.
That doesn't seem like it would work.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if that's a thing or not.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like it's a scam.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, if it makes a difference in appearance, it could just generally be from like stimulating blood flow to the area. Mm-hmm. Or who knows? I mean, maybe it is actually kind of pushing that lymphatic fluid down. Because that is a real thing that can happen. Like if you're sick, like your lymph nodes get swollen,
right?
You can palpate it, like you can feel it, like that.
Yes. Those
tissues can swell and vary in size.
But I thought there's really nothing you can do about it.
I mean, so I'll admit I have not looked into claims related to lymphatic drainage.
Yeah, sorry.
But that is...
This is just something that I keep seeing, and I was like, I'm going to make him explain this to me now.
That is the assumption people have when they make claims about lymphatic drainage.
Okay. And so I guess they think that standing on these whole body vibration things is just going to kind of wiggle the fluid down.
I guess.
In a way.
I guess. Yeah, that strikes me as an implausible claim, but who knows?
Yeah. So with all the other claims that they're making, it seems like the main mechanism that they're proposing is that it, like being on a whole body vibration plate, is going to shake you, obviously, and it's going to force your muscles to contract and relax dozens of times per second. To me, that seems kind of wild. Like, it doesn't seem like that would be a thing that could happen. And I don't know if it does happen, what you could actually expect the results to be. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
So that is, I would rate it as kind of true.
Okay.
So your muscles contract in part voluntarily and in part involuntarily. And a lot of involuntary contractions are reflexes by and large. And those reflex arcs are mainly to respond to sort of like perturbations in what you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. When you need to be able to respond before your brain would have time to process something and you to be able to consciously formulate a muscular response to whatever you're experiencing. Right. And so what a vibration plate is doing basically is you have this platform that is just going up and down like
just a tiny bit.
Yeah, the cutoff I've seen in the meta-analyses for kind of like, is it vibrating a lot or a little, is 3 millimeters. So if it's going up and down more than 3 millimeters, they're like, ooh, that's a large amplitude. If it's less than 3, they're like, ooh, that's a small amplitude. Okay. but it's essentially like when it's dropping, like when it's going down, you're experiencing slightly less gravitational force than you otherwise would, because it's kind of like when you're standing in an escalator and it starts going down, like as it's accelerating downward, momentarily you feel a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
And then conversely, you get in an elevator and like right as it starts accelerating up, your body's still trying to go into the floor, so
like
you feel a
pushing
little
down
bit heavier.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically that,
right?
But just very, very fast and very, very small movements.
I'm just imagining somebody going up and down on an elevator like thousands of times trying to get these same effects.
Oh my god, yeah. But yeah, so that's basically what's happening.
Yeah.
And so as a result, the gravitational, like the downward vertical forces your body is contending with are slightly less when the platform is going down and slightly more when the platform is going up. So there's like a quickly oscillating band of force your muscles are experiencing and trying to maintain like equilibrium, homeostasis, balance, and whatnot against. And so I don't think a full accounting of exactly mechanistically what vibrating plates are doing, like I don't think there's like a full mechanistic accounting of it, but the current hypothesis is that it's basically activating little reflex arcs between the muscles and the spinal column, instead of like having to go all the way up to the brain, to where it's basically like telling your muscles like very rapidly, like, hey, force demands have changed, contract a little harder. Ooh, force demands have changed, contract a little less hard, and just rapidly back and forth over and over again. And I've seen that termed the tonic vibration reflex, but it's basically just a reflex arc that you're using repeatedly, like multiple times per second, to try to find the appropriate level of like muscle force production to match these like rapidly oscillating demands. So yeah, in kind of the main central motor drive probably isn't changing much, if any. So you could conceptualize that as like, oh, your muscles aren't contracting 60 times per second. It's just one contraction, which you would use to like stand up, maintain your posture, whatever, with just like a little sort of like with reflex arcs kind of like editing that slightly. So it's one contraction, but it's getting a little stronger, a little less strong, a little stronger, a little less strong, due to the feedback from those reflex arcs. Or I guess you could conceptualize it as like 30 to 60 actual unique different muscle contractions per second, but I would kind of go the first route.
Yeah. And it's not something that you're feeling, right? Like you don't feel like your muscles are contracting when you're standing on one of these. Or does it feel like it is doing something?
No, you just feel like you're vibrating.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's what I assumed.
Yeah. So it's not something you would feel, I don't think.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not something you're consciously having to contract your muscles super fast. But it's those little reflex arcs that are just modulating muscle contractile force to respond to the very rapid perturbations they're feeling and experiencing.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I think where we want to go from here is going through kind of the history of these pieces of equipment, because something that I found interesting and why I wanted to talk about this is when you see the videos of people using the platforms and stuff on TikTok, it seems like it's just going to be a complete scam. But when I start talking to you about it, it seems like there is research. There is actually a purpose for using these in some contexts. And there actually is a really rich, interesting history of people using whole body vibration in different ways as well. So let's get into that. I think let's go over the research after the history, and you can tell us a little bit about where these pieces of equipment are actually useful. But for now, I want to tell you about the history of vibration.
That sounds great. I am so excited. I know nothing about the history of these devices. They showed up in my awareness in maybe like 2009, and I do not know anything that preceded that.
Okay. Well, it actually started way earlier than I would have thought with the ancient Greeks and Romans. So obviously they don't have like these platforms, but people have been finding ways to vibrate for a long time. So they were creating special carts with irregularly shaped wheels and then driving the carts over uneven ground to increase the level of vibration. And they thought that this was going to speed up the healing process. So it's basically just like you're taking a super bumpy ride. And if you're ill or if you have an injury, this is what they're making you do.
I wonder if there was just like a guy who really sucked at making wheels, but was like a great salesman. He was just like, oh,
that's incredible.
He's like, dude, you say that I made the worst wheels you've ever seen, but what if they're actually the best wheels you've ever seen? Because not only will they get you from A to B, they'll also cure all of your maladies.
They'll heal you. Yeah. So Seneca even described this practice in some of his writings, saying it was beneficial for preserving his health.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. They also did something extremely wacky, which was wrapping saws, like the things that you use to cut things, in cotton fabric and then running them back and forth over an injury. So over an injured part of your body, using the vibration from a saw running back and forth over top of that wound. And they thought that that was beneficial.
You know, so that I think that sounds bad because it's a saw.
Yeah.
But
did their saws suck?
I mean, well, that was still the Bronze Age. So like, yeah, their saws sucked. But also like that doesn't seem too ridiculous, I guess.
Yeah.
Because like there are little they're like personal massaging devices, I guess, that like these aren't popular anymore, but like I remember them from my childhood where they were basically like plastic whatever. So they basically look like miniature anal beads, I guess. Where it was just like a plastic thing with just like little beads on it.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Like not large enough beads to like actually be functional as anal beads.
Okay.
But like that sort of deal.
That's good to clarify.
And you would just like put it over your leg and just kind of go back and forth.
Right.
And the little bumps, like it would apply different levels of pressure as it went over the tissue and like feel kind of nice. And I mean, like, if you wrap a saw in cloth, like that's functionally what it becomes. Like, it's not going to cut you. You know, it's just going to. It's basically just going to be little bumps. Yeah. So yeah, like I don't know that it seems like a barbaric way to get about the same effect, but they also they didn't have plastic back in the day, so like whatever.
I guess it's good. It's good to realize that the saws would be quite a bit different. The thing that I imagine when I think about this is a relatively sharp saw and somebody who is using the saw on you and is just going wild with it and is sawing too hard and the saw starts going through the cotton fabric.
No,
and they don't realize.
I'm sure they put
and then they're
ton
just
of fabric
cutting
around
your
it.
wound.
Yeah.
No,
that I think that was probably less dangerous than it sounds.
It's still funny. Yeah. So that's like the very start of recorded history on using vibration for healing purposes. And then we're going to jump way far forward to the 1800s. And there's a Russian physician and inventor called Gustav Zander who developed an apparatus that used weights and pulleys to create a vibration that was supposed to simulate riding a horse, because they thought riding horses was like a good level of vibration.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of funny because people also use vibration plates for horses now. Like that is a modern thing. Whenever I was Googling around about this, there are like ginormous vibration plates that horse people will buy for their fancy horses because they think it's going to help the recovery and also hoof growth.
Nice.
Yeah.
That sounds. I hope the horses enjoy it. That either seems like something they would love or it would just terrify them.
It said like in the stuff that I was reading that it helped the horses relieve stress, but I'm like, the horses can't tell you that.
Yeah.
How do you know for sure?
Yeah.
And they're just in their little pens on the vibration plate, and the vibration plate looks like it would kind of take up the whole pen. So it's like they don't have a choice. Yeah. They're just standing there vibing.
I don't know. So I'm completely talking out my ass here. I do not know that much about horses, but
that's good.
I think they spook easy, and I think if they're stressed, you know about it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think they either like it or they're just like
they're fine,
paralyzed with fear,
or they might just be fine with it. You know. Yeah. But this guy, this Russian guy, also developed the belt exercises that were popular in the 1900s through like 1930, and then they got really popular again in the 50s and 60s. And it seems like this is a type of vibration plate that a lot of people have seen. It's like you have a belt strapped around your torso, and that is the thing that's vibrating, and it's kind of like vibrating your belly. And so that's another thing that people thought, like for spot reduction, they thought they were going to like vibrate the fat off of their torsos.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I clicked on the link. I have seen those things before.
Right. That's what I figured. And then in the late 1800s, guess who shows up?
Who?
Dr. John Harvey Kellogg.
My man, hell yeah.
This guy was wild.
You know you're in for a good time when John Harvey Kellogg shows up in a story.
He was trying everything. But so he created a vibrating wooden chair that he thought would improve circulation and alleviate constipation. But do you want to tell the listeners what some of the other wacky things that Kellogg did were?
Yeah, so he was... Do you remember this, right? I remember he was like in a minority religious sect, but I forget which one it was.
I think it's Seventh-day Adventist.
I was thinking that's what it was, but I didn't want to accidentally put Seventh-day Adventists on blast. But yeah, so he kind of had like two guiding lights. One was that like any sort of like non-procreative sex was like bad for you and would like drain your body's vital essence. And also he was one of the first, I mean, I'm sure he wasn't one of the first. I'm sure this goes back a very, very long way, but he was one of the first like kind of modern all health is about gut health type of guys. Mm-hmm. So he was like really into enemas, and particularly like yogurt enemas.
Yogurt? That's too thick of a substance.
So I think it was like yogurt cut with water. And I think that he was kind of on like the gut bacteria tip, like, there's good bacteria in yogurt. So it's like, if you're going to do an enema anyways, may as well throw some yogurt in there.
Yeah. No, I actually see something about this on the history.com page that I used to learn about his use of vibration plates. Mm-hmm. So he was an advocate of yogurt enemas, but his just regular water enemas, he created a system that pumped 15 quarts of water per minute.
Oh, what?
That sounds unpleasant.
Oh, yeah, we're going to move right on from that.
You're the one who brought up the enemas.
You asked me what weird stuff he was up to.
It was one of the first things you thought of.
Okay. If you know that and someone says, what weird stuff was this guy up to? That's the weirdest thing he was up to. Like, you gotta... There was no world where I wasn't going to bring up the enemas.
Fair enough.
But anyway, yeah, so he thought that like sexual lust and desire, and in particular masturbation, was just real bad for you.
Yeah.
It would fuck you up real bad. So Kellogg's breakfast cereal, it is that Kellogg. Mm-hmm. It was intentionally made to be as bland as possible, because he was basically working on the assumption that kind of like all excitement and arousal kind of stemmed from the same source. And so if you ate food that excited you too much, that would also like sexually excite you too much. So like,
I think he's just telling on himself there.
I mean, he very well may have been. But yeah, so he founded the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan, and a lot of kind of like high society people who were feeling like they were in a funk, not stoked about city life, feeling low energy. They would go to the sanitarium and just have a bunch of weird stuff shot up their butt and eat the worst food possible.
Yeah.
And do a bunch of like low to moderate intensity exercise for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then go back to the city and say, damn, I'm feeling good.
Yeah. Well, one of the things they could do is to sit on this vibrating wooden chair.
That feels like it's kind of antithetical to the whole like don't get aroused type of deal.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, one of the things he specifically said was that the vibration chairs would, quote, stimulate vital organs in the lower abdomen.
I'm sure they did. He may have not thought quite expansively enough about which organs it would stimulate.
Right. Well, in this article, I also saw that one of his treatments for if you were having thoughts of masturbation was to literally put a cage on your dick. So maybe you were sitting on the wooden chair with a little cage strapped onto you, which makes it even more unpleasant.
Yeah, that's not great. Yeah, so I'm not even gonna touch that. I know entirely too much about like the weird shit John Harvey Kellogg did in attempts to stop people from masturbating, and it
gets much darker.
Yeah, that honestly is one of the tamer ones.
Exactly. That's why I brought this one up. Yeah, it's pretty grotesque.
Yeah.
But back to the vibration plates. He also created a steam powered version. That was like a seat for 5 people, so you and your boys could do it together.
Hell yeah. That rocks.
Yeah. And I just threw in a couple other things here about other treatments you could get at the spa, including a beating and slapping machine, which gave patients the choice of being pounded or flogged. And the purpose of that was just to stimulate circulation, which I feel like there are much better ways to stimulate circulation than having a machine flog you.
Yeah, go for a walk.
Yeah, take a jog.
Go for a walk, yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, yeah, I was delighted that John Harvey Kellogg had something to do with this, and we could talk about him a little bit, but unfortunately it's time to move on.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the rest of this is much more tame, but in the rest of the 1800s, there was a type of vibration therapy that was developed for treatment of Parkinson's disease. And it seems like researchers still do studies about this. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool that they started picking up on that 200 years ago and have been investigating it since then. I think maybe you'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
And then in the 1900s, scientists in the Russian space program started using vibration therapy to help strengthen astronauts' bone mass and muscles. And NASA continues to use vibration therapy to help prevent bone loss to this day.
Nice.
And then after they had this success during the space program, the Russians started using this on their Olympic team. And I think this is the first indication of it being used for athletic pursuits. Mm-hmm. And then in the 1990s, Gus Vandermeer, a Dutch Olympic team trainer, developed the power plate. And this is like the big vibration plate.
Yeah,
like this is the one that's at our gym. This is the one that the Colorado gym has like 30 of. So yeah, it's this Dutch guy in the 1990s who develops it for Olympic athletes in the Netherlands. And that gets us to today. That's the history of vibration. So all the way back to ancient Greeks and Romans using this for healing purposes. And then in the 90s, started using it for athletic purposes. Mm-hmm. And now the girlie's on TikTok, laying on little vibration plates.
Nice. Hell yeah. Yeah, so the idea of people getting into this as kind of like a miracle cure, or It feels like they're approaching it almost as like an exercise hack. Like it will get you all the benefits of exercise without having to put like any effort into it.
And they're doing it for like hours at a time.
Oh,
which is not good.
Yeah. Ooh, man. Yeah, if I would have known they were doing that, I would have looked into this more because so when I was looking through the research on this, I didn't encounter that much about like ultra high dose vibration.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's definitely abnormal for somebody to be doing it for 2 hours a day. But there definitely are kind of the influencers saying that they do it for that long. I think most people who are using it because they are trying to kind of use it as a hack for exercise. And I imagine that if you feel like you're really busy and you don't have time to exercise, you're probably not spending 2 hours just like lying down on a plate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did want to note that some people do use it for hours at a time, and vibrating yourself for hours on end is probably harmful. It seems like most of the research that's been done on stuff like this is the research that's been done on like the harmful effects of vibrations is people who work like in construction jobs or something. So it's like occupational hazards.
Yeah.
And obviously that can have a lot of negative effects.
That's what I was thinking. But I was like, is the frequency, is the amplitude different enough to matter? Because I mean, for like the orthopedic outcomes for like jackhammer operators, really not good.
Yeah.
And even like long haul truckers, I think have a elevated risk of like spinal disc injuries because you're in a spine flexed posture and the truck vibrates more than like most automobiles would. So yeah, like I didn't want to like, well, I wasn't planning on like directly bringing those things up, but that's the first place my brain went when you said they're standing on them for 2 hours, because I'm like, those types of vibrations may be enough different that it wouldn't generalize, but like I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
But yeah. So research stuff. The general tenor of the research. So one thing just to start with this body of research. When you said that you were doing this topic, I will admit I had not looked into the research on whole body vibration much at all. I mean, like a paper or two would come up in the journal suite for mass from time to time, but this is never a topic of research that I had done a deep dive into. Yeah. And when I started, I discovered something interesting, which is that this is one of those fun little bodies of research where it feels like there are like 3 meta-analyses per like piece of original research that's been done.
Doesn't make sense.
Like if you just PubMed search whole body vibration meta-analysis, you're going to get a lot of results. And like I think there are probably more pieces of primary research than review articles, but like it's very close. And generally it's not that close.
Weird.
Which I don't know what's causing that, but it's convenient for me because I would rather just kind of like skim a dozen reviews than have to skim 60 individual papers.
Definitely.
So it was good for getting my feet wet.
Nice.
And what I found basically is that in a extremely small scale way, vibration plates do seem like they mimic some of the benefits of exercise, in that standing on a vibration plate requires a little more muscular effort than just standing on not a vibration plate.
That makes sense.
Doing light body weight exercise on a vibration plate, since you're like activating those spinal reflex arcs over and over, it's a little more challenging than doing a similar exercise not on a vibration plate. And it also seems like the kind of like high frequency stimulation and the activation of those reflex arcs might be helpful for some people with like neurological conditions that might struggle with kind of the central motor drive in keeping their muscles working well. So like you mentioned Parkinson's. And it also seems to potentially be particularly useful for like analgesic effects of exercise. So analgesic means like pain relieving. And there was a meta on people with like knee osteoarthritis, and it seemed like for just like reducing pain a little bit, that vibration plates may be so like all exercise has, I don't want to say all, exercise in general for the most part has analgesic effects, and like is beneficial for people with OA or just like other kind of pain conditions. And so there's like some suggestion that maybe vibration plates are like a little bit better than normal exercise for that stuff, because it helps kind of like desensitize some like other reflex arcs that may be like driving some of the pain perception. Or it could just be that it's a different enough sensation that it kind of like that like if you have chronic pain, some of the pain you experience might be due to the expectation of pain when you do something,
right?
And so like just since it changes the sensations you're experiencing,
kind of distracts your brain a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, like it might be kind of helpful for that. But yeah, like that's basically the lay of the land. So it for the most part, for people without neurological conditions or like OA or like chronic pain conditions or anything like that, it basically seems like a way to make easy exercise ever so slightly harder. And so for outcomes like strength outcomes, for instance, or like there have been a few studies looking at changes in vertical jump height, what you generally see is that in studies where you test vibration plates on like high level athletes and people who are already like quite good at whatever skill you're going to test, it doesn't really seem like they do too much. Whereas if it's a population where, say, just body weight squats would be sufficiently intense to have a positive training stimulus and like cause strength or jump height or like explosiveness type adaptations, the slight elevation in intensity from the vibration plates, and I mean there might also be just some motor learning effects from like activating those reflex arcs and like kind of almost like greasing the groove a little bit, and like making like getting you maybe a little bit better at activating those muscles. Like there was another meta on they termed it neuromuscular activation, but it was just like surface EMG type data. So like it may be helpful for that. So basically, like if you're like basically untrained and doing like sets of 10 bodyweight squats on the ground would be good for you. Doing sets of 10 bodyweight squats on a vibration plate might be like slightly better for you than the 10 bodyweight squats on the ground. But if you're someone who would need to do, say, 10 squats with 400 pounds to actually cause some sort of beneficial effect, doing those bodyweight squats on a vibration plate probably isn't going to do anything particularly useful for you.
Definitely.
So it seems like kind of useful for clinical populations, and elderly populations. So I didn't even mention that. So there have been quite a few studies looking at this in elderly populations, and it seems like it may help with like preservation of bone mineral density a little bit. That one is kind of up in the air. Like there have been like 3 or 4 metas on this. Like I said, entirely too many meta-analyses in this area. And depending on like what aspect of bone mineral density they're looking at, like are we looking at the trochanter? Are we looking at the spine? Or are we looking at like whole body measures? And just like the inclusion exclusion criteria for the studies, it's just kind of a coin flip about whether they're going to see like a small statistically significant effect or a small not statistically significant effect. But it seems like it has kind of a possibly beneficial effect on bone mineral density that's trivial to small in magnitude. And it also seems to help with like balance and maybe fall prevention in elderly people as well, which also goes back to those reflex arcs. Like There are a lot of reasons that falls increase with age, but one of them is like your reflexes get less reflexy. And so, yeah, just keeping them a little more kind of like honed than they would be otherwise.
Staying in practice.
Yeah. So, yeah, kind of useful for old people, kind of useful for people with like certain neurological conditions, and sort of useful for untrained folks. Probably not particularly useful for people listening to this podcast, except for people who might be dealing with some sort of chronic pain.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if the research where they found it being useful for some of those populations, if they were using the whole body vibration or if it was like lower intensity vibration?
I think it was mostly whole body vibration.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, when you said you were looking at whole body vibration, I'll admit I didn't look at research on local or lower intensity vibration
Gotcha.
at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, did you? I thought you were going to say one more thing about people using it for fat loss. But I can just go ahead and say what I had highlighted to mention about that in particular.
Okay.
So you said that the TikTok girlies are using it to promote fat loss.
Yes.
All right. So this is one of those things where they are directionally correct, but practically far off base. So it does take a little more energy to do anything on a vibration plate than it would on non-vibrating ground. So energy expenditure and therefore fat oxidation is ever so slightly higher than it would be otherwise. Mm-hmm. But the impact itself is extremely trivial. So this is from a meta-analysis on the topic, and there have been two. And both of them were very funny because they both found, so comparing whole body vibration to either like control or like similar exercise without whole body vibration, both of them found a statistically significant impact, like beneficial effect of whole body vibration platforms on fat loss. Mm-hmm. But both of them made it extremely clear that like, yes, we found a statistically significant effect, but it is not clinically meaningful.
Yeah.
It's nothing. Like there are a handful of studies. The effect they saw was very consistent. So therefore, like we had the power to detect this small effect. Well, we're talking like over a like 12 to 24 week intervention, like 1 additional kilo of fat loss. Like that's the sort of effect magnitude you're dealing with. And so yeah, these meta-analysts were just like, this is a significant effect, but don't take it seriously. Like don't take this and run with it. Significant doesn't always mean meaningful. And it seems like people didn't entirely get the memo.
Yeah. Somebody must have pulled that and
yeah,
started spreading it.
Yeah, because I mean, they can say like, yeah, a meta-analysis found that this increases fat loss, because like it does, but again, probably not to an extent that actually matters. And so here's like a fun quote from one of these papers. Despite the increased energy consumption and oxidation of fat, Rittweger in 2010 stated that a person weighing 70 kilos while performing whole body vibration would consume approximately 20 liters per hour of oxygen, assuming an energy equivalent of 20.9 kilojoules per liter of oxygen and a caloric equivalent of 39 kilojoules per gram of fat. That would imply a weight loss of 10 grams of fat per hour. Thus, it is reasonable to conclude that this type of exercise produces no loss in fat mass, as the duration of whole body vibration is insufficient to elicit the desired reduction in body fat. So basically, like for Americans listening to this, there's like 454 grams in a pound. So if you're oxidizing an additional 10 grams of fat per hour on one of these, you would need to spend 45 hours on one to burn 1 additional pound of fat.
Oh gosh.
So
And don't do that.
yeah, so the TikTok girlies are not wrong in that it does technically have an effect, but it is an effect that is so small and would take so long to actually manifest to a measurable degree that just like going for a walk would be
Definitely
way better.
Yeah. Just go for a walk.
Yep. So that does it?
That does it. Yeah. My first segment, vibration plates. Now we know they are useful for some things and some populations, but don't buy one just to lie on it on the floor.
Especially for $7,000. Like you can you can have way more fun with $7,000 doing just about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe if there's one at your gym, hop on it. Try stretching. Greg seems to like it.
Yeah, I do like it. Like it's fun. It feels nice. But I would not drop that money to buy one for the house.
Definitely. Okay. Well, if anybody has any ideas or if you want to hear me talk about any other trends that you've seen or articles that you're wondering about or that your friends and family are asking you about and you want our take, then let us know. And I'm excited to do more segments like this.
Yeah. And you can use that email address podcast@strongerbyscience.com for that as well. If there's a topic in the media or just that the TikTok girlies or just some other a branch or clique of the fitness industry that we probably
what the bros
don't watch
are doing
that closely. Yeah, let us know. Let us know what you'd like to see us cover. All right, let's shift gears to my segment, if that's cool with you.
Let's do it.
All right, so I'm talking about exercise during pregnancy. Covering content very similar to a research spotlight back in April. And so yeah, Linz, when you think about exercise in pregnancy, like what comes to mind for you? Like what sorts of exercise do you think would or wouldn't be a good idea? And more importantly, whatever ideas you have about exercise in pregnancy, where do you think those where do you think those ideas came from?
Yeah. So I think generally, I think that exercise during pregnancy seems like a good thing to do. I know that most people are encouraged to maintain a certain level of physical activity during pregnancy for the health of themselves and for the baby. In terms of things that feel safe or not safe or like a good idea or not, I don't know. I think I've been around since I've been around lifting for so long. I've been around pregnant women lifting. And so it doesn't freak me out in the way that it seems to freak a lot of people out. I think in terms of lifting, maybe bench press seems kind of weird. And I just think that's like, oh, yikes, don't drop that on your belly. Obviously, most people shouldn't be dropping the bar on them at any point, though. But that's really the only like lifting activity I can think of that if I saw like an extremely pregnant person doing, it would make me nervous. Probably like super heavy squats or something too.
Yeah.
Just like any degree of like really straining pretty hard when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Seems maybe not great. And then outside of lifting, fighting sports. Don't do that.
Well, yeah, it's not fair. Like you're bringing a tag team into a solo match. Like you have two people fighting one person.
Yeah.
Like obviously pregnant women shouldn't do fight sports.
Yeah.
They would dominate.
That's not what I was thinking, but
okay.
You're totally right. You have double the strength when you're pregnant, and you're going to fuck somebody up. You probably shouldn't like climb K2 or Everest or something. Do anything that's going to impact like oxygen levels. That feels bad.
That feels generalizable though.
Yeah, you definitely shouldn't.
We can just leave it at don't climb Everest.
There's so many people who got lost there this year. Like they're just missing.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. Also, don't go down looking for the Titanic. Like, similar thing. Just stop taking these risks.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, so pregnant women probably shouldn't be deep under the ocean either.
Yeah.
Another thing that's like impacting oxygen or like how your body is functioning.
Okay. Yeah.
But other than that, like, I feel like most exercise probably a good idea during pregnancy. And I don't think I really had many I don't think I really thought about this until I was already kind of into lifting and we were together. So I don't think I really ever had an opportunity to develop preconceived notions of like the danger of lifting while pregnant or anything like that. I've always kind of assumed that it was fine.
Okay. Nice.
I've seen lots of pregnant people squatting, deadlifting, and they seem to be doing fine.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So there is, I think, still a lot of fear and concern
Definitely.
out there about exercise.
Yeah,
during
I
pregnancy.
mean, if you see like the brave souls who post videos of themselves on Instagram squatting while pregnant, people are fucking terrible in the comment section. Like, it's obvious that there is like so much stigma, and like people are going to be telling you what to do if they see you doing that, and telling you that you're doing it wrong, and telling you that you're going to hurt your baby and hurt yourself.
Yeah. Dude, one of my favorite types of comments there is people commenting on a video of a pregnant woman like lifting heavy and being like, like straining like that is gonna like it's gonna cause infertility. It's like,
what?
It's like, brother, they're pregnant. Like the proof's in the pudding. Like check the scoreboard. Like they're clearly at least somewhat fertile. Yeah, there was a belief for a long time that intense exercise would cause infertility, which, yeah, like even if that's something you believe, saying that to a person who's currently pregnant, it's just like that doesn't seem to be the person to say that
right.
to. But yeah, so there is still out there a lot of apprehension about exercise during pregnancy, and especially like intense exercise during pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that actually comes from the Victorian era, which was kind of like early to mid 1800s to like early 1900s thereabouts. Mm-hmm. So like, kind of like middle to late 1800s was kind of the height of that era. Mm-hmm. Sort of like John Harvey Kellogg, actually. Like he was a Victorian era man.
Doing some wild shit.
Yeah.
They were doing wild shit in Victorian era.
Yeah. And it was during that period, it was a fashionable opinion to hold that exercise in general was bad, mm-hmm. and that exercise for pregnant people in particular was like especially bad.
Was that like the heartbeat thing?
Yeah, it was like a pseudo scientific thing. Uh-huh. So kind of like when epidemiology was like kind of in its infancy, and I think people were already aware that the correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation, but I don't think it had been like internalized culturally to the extent that it should have been.
Yeah. People weren't shouting at each other like they are now.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of just like observational stuff where it's mm-hmm. like, hey, look, the idle rich tend to live kind of a long time, mm-hmm. and the laborers who are out there like getting in a lot of physical activity and making their living from the sweat of their brow, they tend to have lives that at that time were still nasty, brutish, and short. Yeah. And so it's like, oh yeah, like there was kind of the idea that the body was almost like a battery. Yeah. And that you just kind of had a fixed number of heartbeats, or a fixed amount of like vital energy. And once you expended it, bada bing, bada boom, that's it. You're going to die.
Had nothing to do with like wealth differences or privilege or anything like that. It's
or like,
just like
access to like nutritious food in a period where like people were still getting
doctors.
Rickets. Yeah. Before we like fully dealt with scurvy.
They're like, oh no, it's because they're exercising too much.
Yeah. So, that most of the apprehension we have today still like just comes from the Victorian era, because before that and after that, it's mostly people being like, oh yeah, like exercise is fine. And during that one era when it kind of dovetailed with mass media, I guess, because like that's when like the penny papers were a big thing, and you could for the first time like disseminate ideas like very broadly. Like the printing press had been around for a while, but like printed stuff was expensive because like paper was expensive. They didn't have like the cheap pulp paper. And yeah, so it was one of the first times that like you could get a glimpse into how people lived kind of across the socioeconomic strata, instead of just kind of the rich people hanging out with the rich people, the poor's hanging out with the poor's. Like there was kind of more awareness of what was going on, and it was just easier to like disseminate ideas easier. So I'm sure that like rich fuckers a long time ago were just like, ah, yes, our idle lives are better than that of the poor's.
Yeah, convenient.
But like they also didn't have a good way to like tell the poor's that like, oh yeah, what you're doing is fucking yup. So
they didn't have a choice anyways.
Right. Yeah. So so that the idea, and certainly like the popularization of the idea that exercise in pregnancy is like bad and dangerous, that large, like what we experience of that today largely just came from that era. But going back before that, exercise during pregnancy was generally seen and considered to be a good thing. So I'm gonna cite a couple papers in the show notes to kind of go through some of this historical stuff. One of them is by Miriam Katz, Exercise Activity During Pregnancy, Past and Present. And the other is by Downs and colleagues, Physical Activity in Pregnancy, Past and Present Evidence and Future Recommendations. So I'm going to be quoting from those two papers during this historical segment a little bit. But yeah, so both Aristotle and Plutarch urged Greek women to exercise to decrease pain during childbearing, which is something we now know to be true. Right. Women who exercise, I don't know if it decreases pain, but it definitely increases it increases your odds of not having to have a C-section, and it also like speeds up labor quite a bit. Yeah. And even up until the 18th century, so like the 1700s, so pre-Victorian era, maternal physical activity was still generally viewed favorably, because people believed, and rightfully so, that it tended to result in easier labor and also reduced fetal size. Like the baby's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to get out. And that is still true. Like you
really.
Yeah, so there's like a, like not big, like 200 to 400 gram lower fetal birth weight in women who exercise during pregnancy versus not. And that was actually something that was kind of flipped on its head again during the Victorian era. It was kind of assumed that like larger fetuses were better. Like it might make for a tougher delivery. Right.
But they're like a big, strong baby.
Well, that like there was, I mean, they found associations that like this is correlated with like lower rates of like infant mortality. Like the bigger babies tend to live better, but it was mostly the bigger babies were born into rich families with idle moms who would have access to better nutrition. Right. And,
so the babies could just get bigger.
Yeah. And the medical practice that existed of the day. But yeah. So, even like from fucking Aristotle until the 18th century, it was like, okay, like maternal physical activity is generally pretty good. Nice. Although by the 18th century, they were recommending maybe no dancing and maybe no horseback riding while you're pregnant, which
horseback riding does seem weird to do while pregnant.
Also, I don't think that was a pregnancy thing. I think that was a like puritanical type of thing. Anyway, whatever.
They're like, that's a lewd thing to do.
Yeah,
You're a pregnant woman. Have some respect.
Yeah, but for the most part, they're like, oh yeah, like be active during pregnancy. That's cool. That's good. Then the Victorian era hit, and it's like, oh no, like you should be as sedentary as possible, like the rich who are more likely to have healthy babies. And one final thing to note before I get off of the like pre-Victorian historical stuff. In a couple of the articles I read, like talking about the history of exercise recommendations during pregnancy, something I saw brought up multiple times were people saying that like the earliest written reference we have to exercise improving like pregnancy outcomes was from the Bible in the book of Exodus.
Damn.
And as best I can tell, so one, like, just spoiler alert, that's not a thing. Like there's not a Bible passage that really supports this.
Did you read the whole book of Exodus last night to make sure?
No, but I did read the surrounding context for the verse being cited. But the citation for this claim that like the biblical writer saying that exercise is good during pregnancy, as best I can tell, it just goes back to a single citation, a paper by Burnett. Title is Value of Prenatal Exercise in the British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology from 1956.
Okay. And
the author of that article claimed that the writer of Exodus said that slave women had an easier time in childbirth than the like Hebrew slave women had a easier time in childbirth than the rich, lazy Egyptian women. And Lyndsey, as a graduate of a Christian university, does that ring a bell for you?
No, but I also did not pay close attention in my Old Testament class.
Okay, well,
you paid close attention in your Old Testament class though, so does it ring a bell for you?
It also doesn't ring a bell for me.
Okay, great.
And like I said, that's because this is one of the worst biblical interpretations I've seen, which like I kind of expect from like Christian influencers on social media.
Yeah.
You don't expect it from a medical journal, but that's what we have here. So the verse being cited is Exodus 1:19. Would you mind reading that for the people from the New International Version?
Sure. The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive.
All right. So that was the single verse quoted to support the claim that, like, yes, even the biblical writer knows that, like, these hardy slave women, they give birth faster because they're more physically active. So, Linz, would you mind reading a bit of the surrounding context as well? So, I can do this if you don't want to.
No, I can do it.
Okay, so this is Exodus 1, 15 through
Did not expect to be reading
21.
Bible verses today. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were... Oh, help me out here.
We're going to go with Sifra and Pua.
Okay. When you're helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own.
All right, so that's that verse in the surrounding context. So, I mean, the midwives just lied to Pharaoh. Like, that's what's going down in verse 19.
Uh-huh.
This passage doesn't provide any evidence that the Hebrew women did actually give birth faster. They were just like,
we weren't there.
Yeah.
We weren't even there.
Yeah. And also, like, I highly doubt that kind of typical Egyptian women, like, over 3,000 years ago were just living a life of luxury. Like, that doesn't really seem to track.
Yeah, they had shit to do.
Yeah, so I mean, so that this was not some sort of like scientific claim that that the Hebrew women did actually give birth faster because they were more physically active during pregnancy than the Egyptian women.
Bizarre to include this in a scientific paper.
It's two midwives just lying to Pharaoh about why they weren't killing babies like they were commanded to do. Anyway, yeah. So that's the historical context, I guess, with a little diversion into the Bible. So post-Victorian era, which kind of ended with World War I. We get into the 1920s, and this is when people started like recommending women be more active, but they were starting from that Victorian baseline of just like, hey, don't do anything. From kind of the 1920s onward, we see this slow progression of like, you can do a little more. Oh, okay, that's going fine. You can do a little more than that.
Yeah.
So you saw like the first kind of, I guess, like early gyms, like things catering to pregnant women to exercise popping up in the 20s and 30s. But then the government got involved, I think, for the first time in 1949 with the U.S. Children's Bureau issuing a recommendation for prenatal physical activity, saying that in the absence of maternal complications, pregnant women can continue housework, gardening, and daily walks, and even swim occasionally. And for the daily walks, it's up to 1 mile, but to break it up into several short bouts, which we look at that. Yeah, what is your thought reading?
I mean, that's
recommendation?
not a lot of walking.
Right. So it's basically saying like, hey,
you're gonna walk that much just like walking around your house, or if they have other kids that they're chasing around.
Yeah, but so it's basically saying like, hey, look, this is the post-war era. Women, get back out of the factories, get back into the homes.
Yeah,
you can do your house, your housewife shit, and like maybe walk a little bit. And that's about it.
But don't go too far.
Which we look back now and we're like, whoa, that's extremely restrictive. But for the time, like this was the first government guideline saying like, hey, women, like you actually can and should be a little active during pregnancy and not just, be in the bed as much as possible.
Yeah.
Then moving on into the 70s and 80s, you see more just kind of like general recommendations for, quote, moderate physical activity. And most of them were kind of like focused on improving maternal fitness and going all the way back to Aristotle, easing labor and delivery. And then in 1985, ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, issued their first guidelines for prenatal physical activity. And they basically said that like, hey, most like moderate intensity aerobic stuff is fine, but you should maybe be a little careful with high impact activities, which we're not talking like skydiving. By high impact, they mean like running, because like there's the impact of each footfall. So like, you can walk, you can cycle, you can swim. Maybe be careful with running. That might still be a little bit too much impact.
Okay.
And if you run, don't go more than like 15 minutes at a time, and still at just a moderate intensity. Don't get your heart rate over 140 beats per minute. And make sure your core temperature doesn't get elevated too much. So that's still like quite a bit more restrictive than the guidelines today, but we're seeing like a big step in the right direction from what people were saying in 1949. Then in 2002, ACOG had another updated guideline that is now, instead of saying like you can do most of this stuff, they're actually recommending that women be active during pregnancy. So they're recommending 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activities most days for pregnant women without medical or obstetric complications. And they also, instead of saying like, hey, some of this aerobic stuff is fine, but like running, that might be kind of dangerous, they gave like a much broader range of activities that saying like, most of this stuff is safe. So that was 2002. And then in 2008, we see the first recommendation for actually allowing any vigorous intensity physical activity at all. So
Nice.
up to this point, it had all been low to moderate intensity.
Yeah.
The 2008 recommendation recommended at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week for pregnant women, again, without obstetric or medical complications. And these recommendations, for the first time, put guidelines in place for vigorous intensity physical activity. And those recommendations were essentially like, if you were already engaging safely in vigorous exercise before pregnancy,
Right.
you can keep doing that. You want to monitor it closely, talk to your doctor, but like if you were already running pretty hard before you
if you're
got
already
pregnant,
in that good shape.
yeah, you can keep doing that, but you probably shouldn't if you haven't been doing vigorous physical activity before,
Yeah.
or if you're gonna start, you need to be like super careful about it.
That makes sense to me. Just
Yeah, for sure. So, that's by 2008, we're getting guidelines that look pretty similar to what we have today, but that was a long process, like from basically the 1920s up to 2008.
yeah.
There it was like, hey, if you're gonna walk, cap it at a mile and break it into little chunks, to like, hey, if you were already doing vigorous exercise before, you can keep with it.
Yeah.
Like it took from the 1920s to 2008 to get that far.
I mean, that sounds like a long time, but I'm actually struck by like all the increments within that and what it would be like kind of generationally each time, where, if you're pregnant, your mom and your grandma are going to have totally different ideas of like what you're supposed to do when you're pregnant, and are going to tell you that, and are going to tell you that you're doing things wrong. Because it is like really a huge shift each generation. And
what they're telling you is probably stuff they heard from their doctor.
Exactly.
Who was
just
reflecting the guidelines of the day.
Yeah.
So the most recent ACOG guidelines were published in 2020, and they were just reaffirmed earlier this year. And just kind of like the TLDR is like most stuff is on the table. So we'll link the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists exercise recommendations in the show notes if you really want to dig into this for yourself, either because you're pregnant, planning to become pregnant, or train a lot of pregnant people. We're not going to go through them in depth here, but kind of the broad strokes is like, yeah, like most stuff is fine, with a few exceptions. So the current guidelines are still pretty leery about vigorous intensity exercise for people who aren't already accustomed to it. And then just kind of like some edge cases, which like you actually brought up like quite a few of these when I asked you about this just at the start of this segment. But they say that pregnant women shouldn't scuba dive because there is the inability of the fetal pulmonary circulation to filter bubble formation.
That makes sense. Yeah. Did not evolve scuba diving.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, never mind. We're not going to get into gas kinetics.
Yeah, let's not do that.
But yeah, and then going the opposite direction, low pressure. It's they're still like kind of leery about exercise at altitude for women who live close to sea level. Although
really?
If you live at altitude, it's like you can keep doing what you were doing that was going fine before. But like,
so like if you went to
if you're
Denver,
if you're from Miami and go to Denver, it's like maybe be a little careful.
Okay.
But that was kind of more couched in terms of like as we'll see, like these recommendations are like intentionally conservative. They're not going to recommend anything unless they're very, very confident it's okay.
Yeah.
And for the exercise at altitude, they were just like, well, it seems fine for women who already live at altitude. There are certainly like reports of women who live close to sea level going to altitude, going for a hike and being fine.
Yeah.
But like, we don't have enough controlled data on this to be like really confident that it's safe.
Yeah.
And there are still also concerns about exercise in the heat, especially long duration or high intensity. Because, dude, exercise in the heat, and especially if you add a dehydration component to it, that puts that like taxes your circulatory system like crazy.
Yeah,
because like you're needing to maintain blood flow to the brain to maintain consciousness. You're needing to maintain blood flow to the muscles to actually keep moving, keep exercising. You're needing to maintain blood flow to the skin for thermoregulation and sweating. And if you're pregnant, you also need to maintain blood flow to the fetus as well.
Yeah.
And so even take the fetus out of the equation, and managing all of that blood flow and oxygen delivery during exercise in the heat is a large challenge to everyone.
Right.
So add a fetus into the mix, shit gets dicey.
Yeah.
And also, I'm pretty sure that if you're first trimester and maybe don't even know you're pregnant yet, getting overheated can cause neural tube defects.
Oh, yikes.
So yeah, like you want to be careful with the heat.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's those are some of the things that ACOG still expresses some trepidation about.
Those make sense to me.
And for our purposes here, there are 3 more that are relevant to lifters. And that is very heavy resistance training, supine resistance training, or supine exercise in general. So that's exercise where you're laying on your back.
Oh, yeah.
And the Valsalva maneuver.
Uh-huh.
So why do you think those 3 things might be something that there would be recommendations against, or at least like caution with?
Yeah, so supine, I mean, I said bench pressing as one of the things. I don't know, maybe just dropping things on your belly.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what else. What are other supine exercises?
Like hip thrusts.
Okay.
Or like glute bridges.
Yeah.
Leg raises. Even sit-ups, I guess. At least for the while you're down part of it. I don't know, like pec flies, I guess. Like dumbbell pec flies. I mean, I'm
really not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, you do most exercises like standing or something.
Definitely.
There are a few you do on your back.
So I'm not sure why they would recommend against that in that case. For like Valsalva and heavy resistance training, I'm guessing it's just like blood pressure related. Yeah. And just like the intra-abdominal pressure that you have to have for Valsalva, or if you're, doing picking up a heavy squat bar off the rack or something like. And also just, you don't want to fail a lift probably. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get like lightheaded and potentially pass out or something. Yeah.
So for Valsalva, you nailed it. For supine and heavy resistance training, there are a couple other considerations. Okay. So yeah, both heavy resistance training and the Valsalva maneuver are cautioned against due to concerns about the very large increase in blood pressure that can occur when you're really, really straining, and especially really straining while doing the Valsalva maneuver. Generally with exercise, what you tend to see is systolic blood pressure goes up, diastolic blood pressure stays like pretty flat, like maybe elevates slightly, but not a ton. With resistance training, you get an increase in diastolic as well, which can be further exacerbated with an increase in intra-abdominal pressure doing the Valsalva maneuver. And basically, like, your systolic blood pressure can get really high if you're going on a hard run, but like diastolic stays kind of low, and they know that kind of those blood pressure kinetics, the fetus can deal with them just fine. Yeah. But when systolic and diastolic go up, that's just high pressure the whole time without any sort of reprieve during the heart cycle. So like there's not just like direct evidence that that's bad, but it's basically like we know the other thing's good, or the other thing is like safe enough, but like we don't know that is fine, that like that blood pressure signature is fine. So they're pretty leery about that. Also with really heavy resistance training during especially the second and third trimester, you have some hormonal changes. Your body starts releasing a hormone called relaxin that, I mean, it does what it sounds like. It relaxes your connective tissues, like your tendons, your ligaments, largely to prepare the birth canal for like actually giving birth.
Nice.
Because like stuff that generally is not moving, it needs to move a little bit.
Get out of the way.
So yeah, you have those hormonal changes which make your tendons and ligaments a little bit laxer.
Yeah.
So there's concern that could increase your risk for like serious sprains and strains. Or even just like an acute, like really bad injury, like an ACL tear or something like that. And for supine exercise, the concern mostly has to do with the weight of the fetus itself. So two of your major blood vessels, your inferior vena cava, which returns blood to your heart, and your aorta, which is like your biggest artery that takes blood away from your heart, they basically run like behind your internal organs, pretty near your spine. And so if you have a lot of weight of the fetus that's over them, and then you're laying on your back, the weight of the fetus might push down on those blood vessels, which could interfere with blood flow, interfere with blood returning to the heart, maybe make you lightheaded, maybe make you pass out. So that's where a lot of the concern with supine exercise comes from.
But you'd be lying down on your back in other contexts, right? Or did they tell you like not to sleep on your back either?
I'm not an obstetrician, so I don't, and I've also never been pregnant, so I don't know what they recommend to you for sleeping stuff. I think they do generally recommend sleeping on your side, though. Like it
seems like it'd be uncomfortable to sleep on your back for that reason.
I think just like supine stuff in general is cautioned against for pregnant women, but in particular supine exercise, because
then you're adding additional weight.
Flow. Well, you might be interfering with blood flow when you're doing something that needs elevated blood flow.
Got it. Yeah.
So yeah, that's where the concern comes from for resistance training above like 70-80% of 1 RM, Valsalva maneuver, and supine exercise. But it is noteworthy that the caution towards those things in the guidelines aren't based on research conclusively demonstrating that they're dangerous. It's more so that there are mechanistic reasons to think that maybe it could be dangerous, and there is insufficient evidence to kind of like do away with those fears. And it's all like it's just generally in keeping with the orientation of the maxim first do no harm,
of course.
Which fun little side note about that, first do no harm, a lot of people say that that's kind of the first thing in the Hippocratic Oath. It wasn't. It did not show up in the Hippocratic Oath. There were statements in there that kind of had the same vibe as that, but the actual like formulation of the statement, first do no harm, came from a speech from a physician named Thomas Idman in the 1800s. Just a fun little fact there.
Damn, he gets no credit.
No.
Sorry, Thomas.
He should. But yeah, so basically this is a slow process. Like expanding the types of exercise that are allowed or recommended to pregnant women. It took us like 70 years to get from you can do daily walks, but up to a mile and in several short intervals, to okay, most things are probably fine, and if you've been doing vigorous exercise before, you can keep doing it. Like it took 70 years to get from point A to point B.
Good for them for updating it though so much, you know?
Yes.
I'm glad we got to this point.
Yes. But yeah, so it is a slow process.
Definitely.
And so let's kind of talk structurally about why that is. So Linz, if you wanted to change exercise guidelines for pregnant women, how would you go about it? Like how would you set up that research program?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because like it's obvious to me that the reason why these guidelines are the way they are is because you can't be putting pregnant women in dangerous situations when you might be endangering them and the fetus.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you study potentially dangerous things without putting women in dangerous situations.
Okay, so I do.
Okay,
and
great.
It's you find women who already plan to put themselves in dangerous situations. Yes. So yeah, when doctors or researchers think that a current guideline like this might be a little too conservative, there's generally a 2-step process to address it. Like you said, you can't start with randomized controlled trials.
Yeah.
Because if the medical consensus is that this thing is dangerous, then if you set up an RCT and you have one group doing what you believe to be the dangerous thing and another group just serving as a control, maybe doing either nothing or something that's generally believed to be safe, there are two outcomes to that study. Either you're right and the guidelines were too conservative and this thing is safe, like we can do it, we can recommend it now, or general consensus is correct and now you have badly injured pregnant women or dead babies on your hands.
Bad.
And
dead babies. No.
IRBs don't like dead babies. There's a principle in research with human subjects that it's so hard to get interventions approved that there is a reasonable likelihood of harm coming to your research subjects. Like there are some contexts where it's possible, but it's so hard to get those approved.
Right.
And generally the discriminating factor is like if the benefits of it outweigh the risks to a large enough degree, like it can't really be debatable. Like, so for example, like a drug trial with a drug that they think will save your life, but might also have some nasty side effects. Like the saving your life is a bigger upside than the nasty side effects are a downside. Right. So like you can get that approved. But even that might be difficult if the nasty side effects are nasty enough. Yeah. Or if the probability of it saving your life isn't quite high enough. Like it's, and in this case, we're talking about like, hey, there's already so much other exercise you could recommend that is safe and effective, that improves or at least doesn't harm maternal health, that improves or at least doesn't harm fetal health, that the marginal benefit of doing heavy resistance training versus the exercise that's already recommended is so small that the perceived elevation in risk that might come along with it, like you're never going to get an ethics board to sign off on it. Yeah. So it's going to be a 2-step process. The first step is you find people who already are doing the thing that is thought to be dangerous, and you observe them, and if their experiences suggest, hey, this probably isn't that dangerous, then, and generally it's not just going to be one observational study. Of course, yeah. You have like a few observational studies in the population of interest, taking part in the activity of interest, and if their cumulative data suggests that like, hey, their pregnancy outcomes look really, really similar to the general population or better than the general population, then you can say to an ethics board, like, hey, the current guidelines suggest this is dangerous, but there's actually a fair bit of observational data now to suggest that maybe it isn't dangerous. So can we do a controlled study to see if this is fine? And then if those go well, then you generally get updates and guidelines. Okay. And that's basically what's happened up to this point. So when they were saying like, hey, don't walk for more than a mile, it's basically just like, hey, let's find working women who are on their feet while they're pregnant, just like working, moving around more than that. Hey, guess what? Their pregnancy outcomes are fine. And hey, now we can do a little exercise study where we have some women not move much and some women walk a couple miles a day. And like, oh, guess what? They're fine. Their babies are fine. Okay, cool. Like you can do some exercise. Like that's that's the general process that all of this stuff has taken.
Yeah.
And we've now reached the first stage of that process for heavy resistance training, Valsalva maneuver, and supine exercise.
Cool.
So the study I'm going to be talking about is called Impact of Heavy Resistance Training on Pregnancy and Postpartum Health Outcomes by Previtt and colleagues. That was just published earlier this year. And so, this was an observational study where they wanted to assess the risk of continued heavy weight training during pregnancy. So they essentially wanted to recruit women who were already doing heavy resistance training, who either planned to or had continued doing resistance training throughout pregnancy, and just see, like, hey, do you have negative health outcomes from this? Are there adverse fetal outcomes from this? Does this seem to increase your risk of pelvic floor dysfunction? Those things. Like, we're going to find people who are already doing this stuff and look to see if the scary outcomes people think will happen, if those actually materialize. They recruited lifters to complete a questionnaire. To take part in the study, subjects needed to have already engaged in resistance training during pregnancy with loads exceeding 80% of 1 RM, needed to be at least 18 years old. And that was really about it. And they got a pretty solid sample for this. So they recruited a sample of 679 lifters in total, who, for the most part, were either like weightlifters, so like Olympic style weightlifters, snatch, clean, and jerk, or CrossFitters. And there were some who did both, some who did neither, but it was mostly like weightlifters and CrossFitters. I think because they did a lot of their recruiting via social media, and those were just kind of the people in their circles.
Yeah.
And the survey itself was pretty big. Like it would have taken about 20 or 30 minutes to complete, and it asked about a lot of stuff. So it asked about how did your training look? Like, did you keep training just as hard? Did you pull back? If you pulled back, when? It asked about.
So it's asking them to recall previously. This isn't.
Yeah.
It's not people who are currently pregnant and like they're observing them throughout.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was like a retrospective thing. And so it asked about like actual complications during pregnancy. So, did you experience preeclampsia? Did you experience gestational diabetes? Stuff like that. Asked about delivery complications, like did you need to get a C-section? Did labor and delivery take a super long time or whatever? Asked about like fetal health, like, was it a clean delivery? Like, is your baby doing fine? And asked about postpartum stuff, like basically, how long did it take you to bounce back?
Right.
And just all of the various symptoms related to that. And so I am not going to go through all of the results one by one, because that would be boring as shit. And there are, and I'm not exaggerating, there are literally hundreds of results. But there was a digital appendix that came with this article that we can link in the show notes, and you can look at every single individual outcome for yourself. But just kind of in broad strokes. So most of the women, as you would expect, were in kind of like the normal childbearing age, like mid to late 20s to early to mid 30s. Like I said, most of them either did CrossFit, weightlifting, or both. And about 85% continued engaging in heavy resistance training during pregnancy. 24% said they maintained their training levels until delivery, which I'm not entirely sure what that means.
Right.
I don't think maintaining training levels was operationally defined, but I assume that means like volume, intensity, frequency, like the general type of level of effort.
Yeah.
Like that really didn't change up until the point of delivery, which if so, I mean, that's very impressive. 72% continued weightlifting so like snatch and clean and jerk style training during pregnancy. 71% did supine exercise, and 34% used the Valsalva maneuver during pregnancy. And just in general, rates of pregnancy, delivery, and postpartum complications were at or below rates observed in the general population. So, like rates of gestational hypertension, for instance, were about 3% in this study versus about 7% in the general population. Gestational diabetes, about 1% in this study versus about 8% in the general population. Postpartum depression and anxiety, about 7% in this population versus about 17% in the general population. The only outcome that, and we'll talk about this later, but the only outcome that on its face looked like a negative in this group of women was a higher rate of postpartum urinary incontinence than what's observed in the general population. So it was about 57% in this study versus about 33% generally. Although rates of incontinence didn't seem to be predicted by the exercise-related variables in this study. So like the women who kept training hard during pregnancy didn't have higher rates of incontinence than the women who pulled back a little bit. The women who used the Valsalva maneuver during pregnancy didn't seem to have rates of incontinence higher than the women who didn't. So like, yeah, so that was kind of an aggregate finding, but it didn't seem to be predicted by the actual like exercise variables they were looking at.
Right.
So yeah, like in aggregate, the results were pretty promising. Yeah, so as for like the specific concerns of the paper, this is this a quote from my article or a quote from the study? I think it's my article, whatever. But yeah, so Olympic weightlifting training, use of the Valsalva maneuver, and supine training didn't seem to meet. Yeah, this is from my article. This isn't from a study. Olympic weightlifting training, use of the Valsalva maneuver, and supine training didn't seem to meaningfully affect rates of pregnancy and delivery complications. However, women who maintained their pre-pregnancy levels of training up to delivery had about 50% lower rates of pregnancy and delivery complications than women who scaled back their training, with the odds ratio there being 0.49. So yeah, that's a pretty noteworthy finding, I would say. So, Linz, what would you take away from these results? Does this study show that heavy resistance training, the Valsalva maneuver, and supine exercise are safe during pregnancy by your estimation?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely enough that you could then take it to a review board if you wanted to do a more controlled trial. And I think like if I was a pregnant person, or if a pregnant person was asking me for advice, like I would find this very heartening. And obviously, like, you know, you want to feel what feels right for your body, but it does seem like this is really encouraging, and it's cool to see that some of these questions that remain are starting to get answered.
Yeah. What like lingering concerns would you have after this study?
I would still be nervous about doing Valsalva, I think. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I don't really know if I have a good reason for that, other than just like the description of what Valsalva is and like what that does to your body. And it just, I don't think if I was pregnant, I would be lifting heavy enough that I would want to do Valsalva.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah, so like you mentioned, this was a study where like if you worked on an IRB, you'd look at this and say like, okay, I might greenlight an RCT now.
Right.
And yeah, like I think that's about where I would be at as well. But it is important to consider that this is observational research, so it can't prove causation.
Yeah, of course.
So like in just something to point out is in this study specifically, there are like multiple levels of selection biases going on here.
Okay.
So the population itself in this study probably isn't super representative of the general population. Because, like, women who do heavy resistance training are a self-selected subset of all women, right? And then women who continue performing heavy resistance training during pregnancy are a subset of women who do heavy resistance training in general. Like, some are going to be more concerned and like, I'm just going to train lighter while I'm pregnant.
Yep.
And then, furthermore, women who completed this questionnaire and participated in the study are a self-selected subset of the women who continue heavy resistance training during pregnancy.
Maybe they had a particularly good outcome, or like they felt really strongly about the way that they decided to be pregnant, and they're like, I'm going to participate in this study because I think I did it right.
Little bit of... what would that be? Would that be healthy responder bias, social desirability bias, whatever? I don't know. Some sort of bias.
I don't know what any of those things mean.
Yeah, that's fine. You don't need to. But yeah, so at all three levels of self-selection here, there are factors that could influence rates of pregnancy, delivery, or postpartum complications. So, for example, just being someone who does heavy resistance training might be associated with other health promoting behaviors, like maybe just generally higher levels of exercise, period.
Yeah.
Which, those might be the things influencing the positive outcomes seen in this study rather than the heavy resistance training itself. Maintaining exercise habits during pregnancy might be related to maintaining other behaviors that would promote a healthy pregnancy and delivery. Right. So if you're the type of person who's, so like some pregnant women kind of like take pregnancy as an excuse to be like, and not, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming anyone for anything, but it's just like, hey, like I'm going to be the queen for 9 months. I'm going to lay around. I'm going to just like, I crave ice cream every night. I'm going to eat a ton of ice cream, just watch a ton of reality TV. And like, honestly, no judgment.
Sounds fun.
Like if I could get away with that for 9 months, maybe I would. Who knows? And like certainly so much about pregnancy sounds fucking miserable that it's like, hey, if you don't want to exercise as much and like that's what helps you get through it. Like no judgment at all from me. But yeah, like just in general, like if you're maintaining heavy exercise during pregnancy, it seems like you're probably less likely to go that route.
Right. You're probably doing a lot of other behaviors. Yeah, a lot of other health-focused behaviors.
Yeah, you're maintaining you're probably maintaining other lifestyle factors that would probably predispose you to an easier delivery. And then like you mentioned, just by choosing to opt into this study, it very well could be that, if you did do heavy resistance training during pregnancy and, like let's say that did cause a miscarriage, you might not want to volunteer to participate in this study and admit that you did something that led to that outcome, Yeah. So yeah, like you for all of those reasons, like you can't necessarily draw causal inferences from this data. And second, if there are causal relationships in play, we can't necessarily use it to determine the direction of the causation. So, for instance, like the finding that the women who maintained their pre-pregnancy levels of training had a 50% lower rate of pregnancy and delivery complications in general. That could be because causally maintaining your training level did cause those beneficial outcomes. Or it could be that if you were having pregnancy complications, that caused you to reduce the level of training you were doing.
Yes.
So both would result in the same odds ratio,
right?
But you wouldn't be able to tease out the direction of that causation. So yeah, that's just like one general consideration, Like another one is like the lower rates of postpartum depression observed in the sample versus the general population. It could just be that if you're someone who is more prone to depression generally, which causes, like lethargy, low energy, like a lack of desire to exercise. It could just be that if you're someone who is just generally predisposed to depression, you're going to be someone who's like less likely to exercise and vice versa, you know? So yeah, like it's hard to know, like if these are causal relationships, what is the direction of that causation? So yeah, there's still some significant caveats, but I think the general takeaway is basically what you said. This is just like heartening information that suggests that like these things that are generally thought to be dangerous may, again, we don't know, but may not be quite as dangerous as people currently fear.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll hopefully see another small handful of observational studies, and then that get people comfortable enough to actually fund and allow a randomized control trial to like actually like nail down for sure, like is this stuff fine or is it not? So yeah, like don't expect this study to result in like sweeping changes to recommendations, but it is kind of the first step down that road. So let's just shift gears very quickly a little bit to end on. So I mentioned that the only like negative finding in this study was that the women in this study generally had higher rates of postpartum urinary incontinence than women in the general population. What do you know about urinary incontinence in women and like lifters specifically?
Not that much. I mean, basically just kind of like observing and like just knowing lifters. I think that it is a pretty common thing for women, and especially for lifters, like during deadlifts, it is not uncommon at all for a woman to pee a little bit on the platform. And it seems like it definitely gets worse for a lot of people after they have had a baby.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, you basically nailed it.
Yes.
Hell yeah, pound it. So yeah, for listeners at home, and in particular male lifters, male listeners, because I assume the women know this already. Like sometimes women pee themselves a little bit when they exercise, and like that's like it's not a terribly uncommon thing,
right?
I think there's still generally a fair bit of embarrassment that goes along with it, and I think a lot of that embarrassment just comes from how people respond to it because they think that it's abnormal. You know, it's like, hey, this is this thing that doesn't normally happen, shouldn't happen, and like it's like weird and bad that there's this woman who like peed a little bit on the deadlift platform or whatever, and so like people are kind of mean about it, and that increases the stigma, and yeah, people feel bad, but like it's not a super uncommon thing.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know the numbers, but just like off the top of my head, it feels like it happens to like 40% of women, like a lot.
Yeah, so that's actually like a pretty good guess. Yeah, so so in this study it was like 57% of the participants,
right?
But in the general population it's still like 33%, and so like
and that's after childbirth.
Yeah, postpartum.
Yeah, okay.
So like in particular here we're talking about stress incontinence. So there are a few different things that can cause urinary incontinence, and stress incontinence is basically like there's some sort of like mechanical perturbation, generally an increase in pressure that puts pressure on the bladder, and that just like causes some urine to leak out, generally due to weakening or damage to the pelvic floor muscles, or I think somewhat less commonly the urethral sphincter.
Don't like that word.
It's not a great word, but that's the word.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. Your body has a lot of sphincters, and I think people feel weird about it because they mostly only think of your butthole, but you got sphincters separating like everything.
Head to toe.
Yeah, like everything in your digestive tract. Like there's one that separates your esophagus from your stomach. There's one that separates your stomach from your small intestine, small to large. And then you got your butthole, but sphincters are useful and they're all over the place.
Okay.
Anyways, but yeah, so I think that I wanted to address the higher rates of stress incontinence seen in this study, like relative to the general population, because I do think there is still the thought in some people's minds that like lifting will increase your risk of developing stress incontinence. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true. I think that it is I think that it is observed more frequently in lifters,
right?
Because they're lifting,
yes.
basically. So if you have stress incontinence, basically if enough pressure is put on your bladder, some urine will leak out, and like it is what it is. Mm-hmm. But if you're not a lifter, you're just going through day-to-day life. When's that going to happen? Like not.
Yeah, I mean,
not
I
frequently.
think with some women, specifically postpartum, it's like sneezing or laughing, coughing, jumping. Yeah,
common one, or like picking something up. Like if you're not like doing a max deadlift, but like maybe you need to move a dresser or something like that. You strain a little bit, you pee a little bit. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So like with stress incontinence, it's basically like a threshold problem. Like if the pressure gets above kind of your personal incontinence threshold, some urine will leak out. Mm-hmm. And basically just like the intra-abdominal pressure and just like the general pressure on your bladder when you're pulling a max deadlift or doing a max squat is just way, way more pressure than you would be putting on your bladder. It's more than like sneezing, or laughing or whatever.
Definitely. I bet like a lot of the women that it happens to while lifting, it doesn't happen when just like sneezing or something. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that essentially what's going on here is that like maybe like 50% of women would have a little bit of incontinence if they pulled a max deadlift. Mm-hmm. And about 30% of women would have a little bit of incontinence not being a power lifter and just laughing, sneezing, coughing, jumping, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it's essentially that 20% delta is just a matter of like, hey, it's just because like 30% of women kind of have a lower threshold, 20% have a higher threshold. If you're not a lifter, if you would have incontinence, but it's kind of that higher threshold thing, you're just not going to experience it because you're not ever like putting that much pressure on your bladder. Yeah. Whereas if you're a lifter, you will. Yeah. So yeah, that's like I'm not a doctor certainly, and not like a specialist in this area, but that's my read of this literature that it if you have some sort of like if you have stress incontinence, it like lifting will probably reveal that to you, but it probably doesn't actually increase your probability of developing incontinence, or if you already have it, it probably doesn't actually make it worse. And in kind of the evidence supporting that is so like I said, in this study, the exercise variables themselves weren't related to like the risk of postpartum incontinence. Like the women who kept training hard didn't have higher rates of postpartum incontinence than the women who didn't. Like it didn't. And like if exercise was the causal factor, you would expect to see associations between exercise variables and rates of postpartum incontinence. And there's also additional research on powerlifters. So there was a 2021 study by Wikander and colleagues, urinary incontinence in competitive women powerlifters, a cross-sectional survey. And I mean, basically what they found is that like rates of incontinence were associated with like age, like rates go up as you get older. Yep. How many kids you have. Yep. And that's about it. Yeah. It was also like associated to some extent with years of powerlifting, but years of powerlifting is also associated with age. Yes. And that was that's
how time works.
Yes. But that was a like weak association that was not statistically significant. Mm-hmm. Same with total years of strength training. that was actually a weak negative association, also non-significant. And so, yeah, like if it was like a causal thing that like heavy resistance training actually increased your risk, you would expect there to be like an exposure thing there. Like the longer you've been doing it, the higher the rates are. But yeah, like it just seems like, if you have more kids and if you're older, it's more likely to happen.
Yeah.
That's true for lifters. It's true for the general population. And lifting itself doesn't seem to meaningfully affect your risk, I don't think.
Are just like normal lifting exercises that you would be doing able to increase the strength of the pelvic floor, or is that something that has to be targeted specifically?
Oh man, so I could wade into what I know to be a pretty big argument.
Okay, sorry.
On the internet. And that
was just like a off the top of my head question.
Yeah, so I could, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, please don't.
But I'll present the perspectives that exist. One is that some like pelvic health specialists think that like lifting heavy, especially with a belt while doing the Valsalva maneuver, is actually bad for your pelvic floor muscles and increases your rates of incontinence. So whatever, I'll wade into it. I don't think that's true. But the thing supporting it basically is like, if you conceptualize your abdomen as like a pressure vessel, which, hey, we know a lot more about that due to the Titan sub disaster.
Yeah.
So, whatever. This is going to be a terrible analogy. So just imagine that the circumference of your torso itself, like your tummy, your sides, your back, are the walls of that pressure vessel, and your diaphragm is the top of it, or now let's go with the bottom of it.
Okay.
And then your pelvic floor is like the porthole that a lot of people think was the weakness,
the weak spot
that made it go. So if you conceptualize it that way, essentially, like as you're pressing down, like your diaphragm's locked in, it's not really going anywhere. You got a belt on around your abdomen, that's not really going anywhere. So if you have excess pressure, that's going to put strain on your pelvic floor muscles and kind of stress them and stretch them out a little bit. Again, like if that were true, I would think that like time spent competing in powerlifting would be positively associated with urinary incontinence, and it's not. So I don't think that's what's going on. But that is a perspective that exists.
Yeah. Okay.
That plenty of people who have looked into this way more than I have find credible. So
that's just your layman's opinion.
Yeah, my layman's opinion. Don't take it too seriously. Don't get too mad at me. So that is one perspective. The other perspective is that like, that's like kind of neutral, but, so like to continue that perspective, they basically say that, so like the belt, like maybe that's kind of sketchy, who knows, but you can still lift heavy. But it's better if you don't use the Valsalva maneuver, maybe don't use a belt, but brace in a way that as you're tensing the muscles of your abdominal wall, you're also like tensing and like pulling kind of up and in on your pelvic floor muscles.
Yeah.
And that like as you're doing that, like that will strengthen your pelvic floor muscles as you're doing any other kind of exercise. So like it's something you can do, but it's maybe not something that would be done by the way people would generally brace for heavy lifting. The other perspective is basically mine, which is just like, if it's probably fine. And like so basically the thing about like bracing differently, where you're like tensing and like drawing up and in your pelvic floor muscles, like that probably is good regardless. But kind of the alternate perspective is like, dude, no, you can still wear a belt. Like you can do a Valsalva maneuver as most power lifters would do it. And that's not going to like independently cause like more weakness or damage to your pelvic floor muscles. But then like independent of like your heavy squats and deadlifts, you can just do like pelvic floor muscle training.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, like those are kind of the two directions. And either way, like you can do pelvic floor training. It's good for you. Like it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's what I got there.
Okay.
So do you have any closing thoughts on this topic, Lyndsey Lou?
I think I'm just heartened, like we've used that word a couple times now, that these exercise guidelines keep moving forward, especially since it is kind of hard to update them.
Mm-hmm.
So, it seems like a lot of research doesn't take women's issues or like things that affect women particularly seriously. So it's nice to see a body of literature that does seem to be taking this seriously and does seem to be like putting in the work to make sure that guidelines are being updated and that women are able to like make choices and keep training if they want to, and do that in a way that they can feel good about. And I guess I salute the pregnant women out here squatting in gyms and having to deal with everyone knowing all of the old exercise guidelines and trying to tell them how to live their life.
Yeah, more power to them.
Yeah.
Not a life I would want to lead.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that wraps up this episode. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to give us any feedback, again, the best places are probably the Stronger by Science Facebook group or subreddit. Also, as I mentioned previously, we're going to do audio Q&A. So if you have a question for the podcast, record a voice memo. Try to keep it under 30 seconds. Definitely keep it under 60. If I open it and it's 1 minute and 5 seconds, I'm not listening to it. Like, don't send it if it's over 60 seconds. But try to keep it under 30. Send that to... You're laughing.
No, I'm
being serious.
I know you're serious.
I'm not listening to a 5-minute question.
I know.
I don't have the time or desire to do that.
Why I'm laughing is because I think we just recorded like a 2-hour episode and they're listening to this and now we're being like, we will not listen to you for more than 60 seconds. Keep it brief.
I know, because that's the thing. Like,
we have too much to say.
Yeah, you ask a question, we're going to spend 45 minutes answering it. If your question itself is 10 minutes, the show is going to get ludicrously long.
It hasn't already, but it will.
Yeah, so keep it snappy. Like, you need to be brief because we are incapable of doing so. So yeah, if you have those questions, send them to podcast@strongerbyscience.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, rate, review it on whatever podcasting platform you use. Make sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. And we're excited to be back.
Yeah, we are.